From the Predator turning his back on the UFC and joining PFL, to Khabib Nurmagomedov taking the former UFC heavyweight champion's side, here is how Francis Ngannou clapped back at Dana White. The Cameroonian French professional did something that's been a long time coming, 19 years to be exact. He became the first reigning UFC champ to say peace out to the world of MMA back in the day. BJ Penn did the same thing back in 2004, but he returned triumphantly to the UFC just 2 years later and even snagged a world title in another weight class. As for Ngannou, his return to the UFC seems like a long shot. The Predator himself, known for his insane punching power, signed a fat deal with the Professional Fighters League on the 16th of May, 2023. That contract makes him one of the highest-paid athletes in MMA history. Oh, and the PFL even gave him the green light to dabble in boxing and rake in those big boxing paydays. But here's where it gets interesting. Ngannou's taking on a big role in building up PFL Africa. It's like he's returning to his roots and putting MMA on the map of the continent he came from. While everyone's psyched for his new venture, where did things go wrong with the UFC? In comes Dana White, whom Ngannou was always at odds with. Before his last fight against Cyril Gane, he met Dana in a restaurant to air his grievances. Francis told him that he feels like he doesn't belong and is getting a tough time finding a promoter. Shockingly, the Cameroonian French professional claims he was gaslit. On hearing how Ngannou felt, White pulled an Uno reverse and questioned him. When has he ever had problems securing tickets or been denied access to the PI? That's when Francis realized that White was dodging accountability and that matters were long past resolution. While Dana assured him that he needs to change his team and might find luck with fights, Francis threw in the towel and decided to go his own way. Except their relationship was fractured years ago over failed contract negotiations. Ngannou's UFC contract had been a hot topic in the MMA world for nearly 2 years, with everyone wondering if he'd stay with the UFC and have that epic showdown with Jon Jones. Little did they know, he was turning his back on the UFC octagon for good. At the post-fight press conference for UFC Vegas's 67, Dana spoke about Ngannou's status with the promotion, or should I say the lack of it. Turns out the president was hard at work, trying to work out a new deal with him for 2 long years and was egging him on to fight Jon. But this is where it gets ugly. Ngannou turned down a deal that would have made him the highest-paid heavyweight in history, even more than Brock Lesnar. According to White, Francis was playing it safe and backed out of the deal to protect his self-image. To Dana, they left no stone unturned in trying to please Francis. So when he refused to shake hands on their deal, the UFC took it as a sign to call it quits. They released him from his contract and gave up their right to match offers from other promotions. To add that insult to injury, White tried to pin all the blame on the Cameroonian and said Francis wasn't in shape for a big fight anyways, given his knee needed recovery post-surgery, and he was adding on pounds. Yikes. So, fans gave up their hopes to see Francis on the big stage, while Jones geared up to face Cyril for the heavyweight championship at UFC 285. Except, this is the president's side of the story. Ngannou believes the two have had friction since he became vocal about his rights. It all started back in 2021, when Francis was about to face Stipe Miocic for a rematch. He wanted to negotiate a fresh contract after each fight, but Dana didn't take it well. When Ngannou texted him about it, he got ghosted, and after he defeated Miocic and became the champ, fans noticed something odd. White wasn't there to put the belt around his waist. People started guessing that this little belt snub might be the start of their beef. They believed that moment was a clear sign that things weren't right between Ngannou and Dana. But the real trouble started way before that. Interestingly, Ngannou proposed the contract negotiations idea even before his first fight with Miocic. The UFC was pressuring him, and the Cameroonian French fighter didn't even have a manager at the time, so he told Dana to focus on the upcoming fight first. Then they could talk about contracts later. Naturally, the UFC boss didn't like being told what to do. The Predator believes that since that moment, the last 4 years of his UFC journey felt like he was fighting without a promoter. And you know what's even more shocking? He's spitting facts, saying Dana's remarks about him struggling with knee surgery and weighing over 300 pounds are total lies. Either way, the UFC president refused to back away quietly. When word got out that Francis had signed a deal with PFL, Dana didn't hold back. To White, the contract signing made no sense, and that was the final trigger for the Cameroonian. Francis snapped back on Twitter on the 21st of May, claiming that he finally felt at home and valued. More so, he's locked in for 2 or 3 fights with them, and each match is going to earn him a hefty 7-figure purse. But Ngannou had more to say, revealing he'd held his end of the bargain when he was still tied to the UFC. Now that he's free from these chains, Francis feels like he's had the last laugh, because he has, in fact, returning to the ring. With the upcoming boxing match against Tyson Fury, Ngannou feels like the UFC tried to take the spotlight away from him. Now he's used all the hate the naysayers have sent his way to fuel him to become stronger. And here's the kicker: if Ngannou proves to be a knockout investment for the PFL, it could set off a chain reaction. Other fighters might start demanding their worth too, and the whole MMA world could see a shift in how contracts are negotiated. But does the American MMA promotion company care? When it comes to the UFC, they've always been about their brand first and foremost. Individual fighters may come and go, but the show must go on. They've built a massive following, and their focus has never been solely on one superstar. Sure, there's been some exceptions where fighters became megastars, but the UFC knows how to keep things rolling, even when big names leave. It's all part of their master plan. Fighters like Francis may be big deals for a while, but eventually they move on, and the UFC keeps chugging along like a well-oiled machine. They've built a solid foundation, and their brand is bigger than any single fighter. So, while Ngannou's departure might make some noise, in the long run, the UFC will continue doing what they do best: delivering epic fights. Speaking of epic fights, fans might be rallying to see a Fury versus Ngannou showdown. But is Francis ready for the challenge? Well, it looks like UFC star Paddy Pimblett has made his prediction, and he's putting his money on Tyson to come out as the victor. Ngannou might be heavy-handed, but let's not forget that he's relatively new to the boxing ring, while Fury is a seasoned world heavyweight champion. Pimblett believes that the WBC heavyweight's boxing skills will be too much for the Cameroonian. He bets on Fury keeping him at bay with his jab and outboxing him throughout the match. After all, boxing and MMA are two very different sports, and experience in one doesn't necessarily guarantee success in the other. While Ngannou has that one-punch knockout power like Deontay Wilder, Pimblett is convinced that Fury's overall boxing prowess will prevail. He's not just talking about this specific fight either. The English MMA star believes that Tyson is unbeatable and nobody in the heavyweight division can take him down. And more stars can't help but share their 2 cents. Khabib Nurmagomedov has spoken, and he's not afraid to ruffle some feathers with his bold prediction for the clash. According to the Russian, in the world of boxing, Fury is on a whole different level, and no one can touch his face. Except perhaps for Alexander Usyk, who he sees as the toughest challenge for the heavyweight champion. But, and this is where it gets interesting, if they were to step into the octagon for an MMA showdown, Khabib believes Ngannou would have a shot at victory. You see, it's a whole different ballgame in the world of mixed martial arts, where Francis's killing power and raw strength would come into play. In the confines of the octagon, anything can happen, and Khabib thinks that's where Francis's chances lie. We'll have to wait and see how the boxing match plays out on October 28th. For now, Francis is focused on training, and videos of him tearing down a boxing bag have already surfaced. Will the Predator take down the Gypsy King? Time will tell. So, from Khabib Nurmagomedov having the former UFC heavyweight champions back, to the Predator turning his back on the UFC and joining PFL, this was how Francis Ngannou clapped back at Dana White.